Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we're going to be exploring how we engage young people and adapt content for different age groups. So you, our volunteers, are experts in your career, your job role and your story. And what we're going to do today is to help you think about how best to frame your stories for children and young people with some insights and expertise from teachers and a volunteer. So before we give you some introductions and an agenda of how today will work, we're going to launch some polls to get an idea of where you are on your volunteer journey. So the first question is, have you volunteered with Inspiring the Future before? So you should see that come up on your screen, and I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that. And for those that are trickling in, we're just doing a poll to get a sense of where you are on your volunteering journey. So maybe a couple more seconds on that. Great. So, okay, that's a real mix. So there's a couple, so we've got 21% who have said no, not yet. We've got 36% who have supported primary and secondary, which is awesome. 18% who've just supported secondary, and 25. Okay, really interesting and great to hear different backgrounds where you're coming from. Okay, the second question is, how confident do you feel adapting your sessions for different age groups? And we will also ask this one at the end as well, so that we can hopefully see a big shift in your confidence as a result of the webinar today. So again, for those of you who are trickling in, we're just doing a poll to get a gauge of your confidence pre-webinar, and we'll also be asking post-webinar as well. So maybe 10 more seconds to fill that one out. Okay, so we have 60% of you feeling somewhat confident, 3% not at all, 17% not so confident, 14 very, and 6% extremely. Okay, really hope that wherever you are in terms of your confidence levels, that we can shift that up, even those that already feel extremely confident. So I'm delighted to be joined by a team of people supporting today, and you will see them on the panel here. My name is Victoria York, and I'm the volunteer and campaigns manager at the charity, and it's my job to ensure that you have the resources and support that you need on your volunteering journey with us. I'm joined by my colleague Avanti. Avanti is head of schools programme working across primary and secondary. And I'm also joined by three fantastic people who have taken their time out of their very, very busy schedules to share some tips and tricks on engaging young people. So we have Liam, who is sharing his perspective as a primary teacher today. Liam is an assistant head teacher at Crosshall Junior School in Cambridgeshire. We are pleased to welcome Sally Ann, who is sharing her perspective on engaging secondary students. Sally Ann is an employer engagement manager at Eckington School in Derbyshire. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Nicola, who is an Inspiring the Future volunteer, and this is a mouthful, so let me get this right, a data analytics trainer and IT audit manager. Nicola will be talking through her experience as a volunteer and how she's adapted her content for both secondary and primary children. So before I let these wonderful people share their wisdom with you, I am going to go through the agenda today. Just before I do, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar that you would like to ask, please do add in the questions in the questions box, and we'll try and get through as many of them as possible. We also have my colleague Sarah on. She's invisible at the moment, but she's managing the questions, presentation and chat. So the agenda, what you'll get from today's session, we will firstly start with the importance of adapting your talks or answers and looking at why. And then we will talk about the 3 key things that you will want to consider when adapting your content. Then we will do a bit of a deep dive into primary with Avanti, and then communicating with primary children with Liam. And we'll do the same thing with secondary students with Sally Ann. And then Nicola will be sharing her examples of how she's adapted her talks to primary children and secondary students, before hopefully some time at the end for some questions. So without further ado, why is it important to adapt content, and why do you need to adapt for different audiences? So the first reason is to ensure that what you're saying is relevant to the audience. It's important to be mindful of your audience and tailor making your content accordingly. So it wouldn't be relevant to talk to a 7-year-old about career pathways, or to give a broad and simple overview to a 17-year-old who might be writing an apprenticeship application for your organisation. Different age groups will need different things from you, which we will cover today. The second thing is to make an impact. So if you want to make an impact and make the most out of your talk, you must think about who your audience are and how you can tweak your talk to them. One size doesn't fit all, and it might just be some little tweaks here and there that will really make the difference. And lastly, it's important you adapt your talk so that you don't say anything inappropriate. So young people are at very different levels of development. So what might be deemed appropriate for a 16-year-old in a one-to-one mentor chat might not be to an assembly of 6-year-olds. So I'm now going to talk about the key things that you should consider. And as I talk through my key points, I'm going to be using someone working in HR as an example to illustrate. So the first point is always consider that the language you use. We're often experts in our fields and we don't really realise how much knowledge we have, so we use jargon and acronyms and words that mean nothing to anybody outside our industry, least of all a child. And what is often a very complicated job is complicated enough to keep us very busy for at least 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So how do we simplify that down? Well, here you'll see some examples of words and how you might adapt this depending on whether your audience is primary or secondary. So here I've used 3 words: recruitment, salary, and confidential. Now with recruitment, if you're talking to secondary students, we would suggest that you define the word in the first instance and refer it to the hiring staff while you're defining the word. That way they might learn something that they didn't know prior. For primary, we would say simplify that right down to finding people to do a job. For salary, it would be the very same thing, defining the word, or if you wanted to, you could ask who knows what salary is and add an interactive element. But a working definition that might work is a fixed regular payment for the employer to employee, usually paid on a monthly basis. And then again for primary, it would be simplifying that down to money paid for the job that you do. And for confidential, it's likely that secondary students will know what that word means, but they might not know what that means in a professional circumstance. So do define that and give an example. And then for primary, something like keep private or secret would work as an alternative. So the second key thing to consider is how you simplify your role or your sector or your day-to-day. So when talking about your role with secondary students, we would recommend giving an official definition and an example of a key thing that you do in your role. So for example, in the context of HR, this might be, I work in human resources, which is a department or of a business or organisation that deals with hiring, administration and training of staff. To give an example of a key part of my job, I'm responsible for hiring staff, so we put together a job advert, go through applications and lead the interview alongside other members of the wider organisation. How you might just adapt that for primary is by saying, it is my job to look after the people in our organisation and make sure that they are happy. Sometimes new people join the team, so I pick the right person and look after them on their first day, so they settle in and feel comfortable. When we're looking for somebody new to do a job, it's called hiring. I would put out a job advert and read all the letters that came in and pick people to come in for a chat, which is called an interview. For sector, we would suggest that when you talk to secondary students, you give a brief and concise definition of your industry and the key purpose your industry serves. And with primary, we would recommend that you try and link the sector back to them and how it would relate to them in their life. So for example, if you work for HR in a water company, you might ask, raise your hand if you've water tap in your house, and does anyone know who is in charge of clean water coming from the tap? And then on day-to-day, For secondary, we would say talk more broadly about how any one day might look and the key tasks that you do. So for example, my day usually starts with a team meeting, sorting through my inbox and then blocking out some time for specific tasks, which could include posting a job advert online or organising payroll, which is ensuring staff get their monthly payment paid to them on time. And then for primary, we would recommend that you keep it really simple, down to the time that you work, whether that's day or night, how long a day's work might be, where you work from, and one or two things that you might do in your job. The third thing to consider is how to bring your job to life. So for both secondary and primary, visual aids are a great way to capture the imagination. And while many of our recommendations may be applicable to both, there are nuances between the two. So for secondary, we would say use props that showcase your role and the kind of tasks that you do. So the props can then be a launchpad for some more detailed questions and strengthening the understanding of exactly what your job entails. So using HR as an example, that might be work template for an interview form or a checklist. It could be a job advert that you've posted or information about the company that you work for, or it could include photos that show your workplace in action. For primary, you'll want to use your visual aids and props to capture the imagination and use props that relate your job to the outside world that they recognise. So again, using HR as an example, this could be through wearing a uniform or professional attire or name badge. It could be work passes, business cards and branded products such as pens, software that you use regularly. Again, it could also be photos, like in secondary. And the last point I want to make on the kind of props, that obvious isn't necessarily bad. So, you know, don't be worried if it's a really, really obvious object. The more relatable the object, the easier it will be for young people and children to understand and visualize your job. So before I hand you over to Avanti and we deep dive into the difference between primary and secondary, I do have a few more for you. First thing would be have a hook, so do try and start your presentation with a hook so that you hook your audience straight away. So that could be a story about what you wanted to be at their age, or a surprising fun fact about your job or industry or organisation. The second point would be, if you do have young children or in contact with young people, don't be afraid to test out describing your job in front of them. They might not necessarily appreciate being guinea pigs, but it gives you a good idea of response and engagement. And lastly, you're not expected to be a TED Talk expert or YouTube star. So it's an already saturated market and we don't want you to feel stressed about having to be an expert at public speaking. So remember, the young people will be pleased to be speaking to someone new. You have a very unique story to share, and when in doubt, keep it simple and ask your audience so it's interactive and you learn more about who your audience are as you go. And Avanti, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Victoria. I'll just give a little bit of context of the primary setting before we hear on the ground from Liam. Thank you for bearing with me. So at primary school, there is no explicit requirement for careers education, but many schools, especially those in disadvantaged areas, will have an objective of raising children's aspirations, and they'll generally be interested in children learning about the wider world. So this might be addressed through subjects such as PSHE, which is personal social health education, or as an enrichment activity outside of lessons. Our research also shows that importance of early intervention, because we know that children form ideas about who they can and can't be when they grow up as early as age 7. And these ideas are often gendered. So we want to tackle that early. At primary school, so therefore we talk about career-related learning or aspirational activities rather than careers advice or guidance. And the formats you see here on the slide, which are described further in your handbooks, I won't go into, they are designed to be interactive, meet children's shorter attention spans and expose children to a breadth of jobs out there. Just hearing from relatable role models, just planting those seeds of curiosity. Then it's about helping them see the relevance of their subjects, of what they're learning in school and how that can apply to the world of work. So it's just about exposure and giving them a flavor. Next slide, please. So when you get invited to events, you may see reference to key stages or year groups. And if you don't have, or you haven't had children in primary schools, you might not be aware of what those are. Not a thing to get bogged down with. We will circulate these slides afterwards. But just so you're aware, Key Stage 1 refers to 4 to 7-year-olds, and Key Stage 2 refers to 7 to 11-year-olds. Most activities will likely be targeted at the latter, that 7 to 11-year range, even if it's a whole school assembly. So as a rule of thumb, you can pitch your talks to 9 and 10-year-olds as a kind of average, unless asked otherwise by the teacher inviting you. Next slide, please. So before you give your contribution in an activity, it may be helpful to remind yourself, what do we want children to gain from the session? So to recap, it's about broadening horizons. As we say, children can't be what they can't see. So this is about exposure, raising their aspirations so they can picture themselves where you are, motivating them in what they're learning in school, and tackling those gender stereotypes. Again, it's all just about giving them a flavor. So next slide, please. So what you can do to help meet those objectives, again, to recap, give them that faith that they can be like you, they can reach the heights that you have, regardless of their background. Again, linking to their subjects. So even if you aren't in a STEM job, talk about how maths might be useful, or if you're not in a humanities sector, then talk about how English is still useful in your job, for instance. Paint a broad, simple picture, as Victoria's illustrated. Really, they're really excitable and curious at this age. So you want to feed that by giving little tidbits and stories. They respond really well to stories. And just as with secondary, openness, authenticity, and your enthusiasm. Your enthusiasm for your job will be contagious for them, and they'll respond really well to that. So to give us that perspective from a primary school, over to Liam.
Thank you. Following on from that, the main thing that we want to get across to our children is the importance of study at the age that they are at the moment. And whilst we're imparting that on them, it's wonderful to have that from visitors to the school who come in to talk about how what they learned at primary school has been foundation for what they've go on to do since. At our school, we have a curriculum that's called the Future Me curriculum, which is all about thinking about what their futures are going to be like. So might they be a volunteer in the community that they live in? What sort of a house do they want to live in, and how are they going to pay for that house? What sort of jobs might they do? And just helping them to understand that actually people's jobs are a huge part of their life, because that's the way they get their income. It might be where they make many friends as colleagues, and trying to get across to them that people having jobs that they enjoy and coming in and talking about that in the way that the volunteers do really, really enthuses them. As Victoria and Avanti have already said, for a primary school, what we really want them to think about are those soft skills. So what is it that makes someone get up and go to work every day? What is it that makes them employable and get on with their colleagues? What are those things that maybe transcend different job types that people need if they're going to stay in employment? And if they start building those as a 7 and 8 year old, they're just going to become part of their personality, and they'll have those for life. As we've said, we want to broaden horizons, so the children will know what mum and dad do and what aunties and uncles do. But if they've never met someone who works in HR before, or they didn't realise that the British Army employs chefs, they don't know that those opportunities are out there. We also have invited some volunteers in to talk about the roles the children aspire to. So many of our children aspire to be a professional athlete or a YouTuber or a blogger. And of course, they only see the finished product. So when we had a YouTuber and a blogger and a professional footballer come to talk to the children, they really spoke about where they started, how they've had to keep persevering at it. It doesn't just happen by magic and overnight, and all the work that goes on behind the scenes, if you like. You as volunteers are fantastic because we have no extra budget to pay for people to come in to talk to our children. So the time that you're able to offer is wonderful, and we really appreciate it. Also, at the moment in our current climate, the pre-recorded sessions that Primary Futures have been able to offer, and the virtual What My Line assemblies have allowed some different people to come in to talk to us, so they don't have to actually travel to our school to talk to the children. So that's really added to what we're able to offer. Of course, bringing the vocabulary that you use, make it accessible for the children. Something I know Sally Ann speaks about is maybe the children will research you at her level. At our level, sometimes when we have volunteers talking about maybe Facebook or LinkedIn and things like that our children might not know about, that can sometimes add an element of confusion. So just thinking about what might they experience in their lives and what is it that they're going to be able to understand. And as I said here, 3 tips: the importance of study, and that they don't have, they can try and catch up, but it's more difficult. But the work they're doing at the moment in primary school is going to impact on their future. Anecdotes for bringing your job to life. So talking about what's good about your job, but also the negatives are good to hear as well. And sometimes we have children who are inspired by a job that they want to do, but also at the end we have some children who say, oh yeah, actually I listened to that, but no, that job's not for me, I don't like the sound of that anymore, which is equally as useful for them to hear. And then just explain as simply as possible what it is that you do in your job. One of the most interesting talks that I ever listened to was by someone who worked in HR, and I had no idea what HR did. I didn't know about the legal knowledge they have and things like that. So I often learn a lot from those talks as well. But mostly, thank you for giving your time. One last thing is check with the school what they want you to do, because all schools will want slightly different requirements or angles of you. So if you just take that bit of time to find out what age range you're talking to, how it fits into what the school are doing in school, that'll help you to shape that talk. But thank you again for the time that the volunteers give to us. It is really appreciated.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liam. And that is really helpful again to recap that you can link to this is about learning for life, or what you might call life skills or essential skills at that age. So you as a person, you can also bring that in because your job is such a big part of that. So now I'm shifting to thinking a little bit in the older age range with secondary schools and colleges. In the case of secondary schools and colleges, they are explicitly required to provide quality careers provision, and they will have dedicated staff for this, such as Sally Ann, often called careers leaders. These are staff dedicated to coordinating a range of careers activities. So that might be Q&A panels, speed networking sessions, CV workshops, mock interviews, or careers fairs, which are often dedicated whole day or half day sessions, rather than just being timetabled into a lesson slot. So you might be invited to any of these formats. And secondary schools are required to give employer engagement experiences to all year groups, but in particular, year 10 and year 12 often have the more traditional work experience week. So next slide, please. So at secondary, again, we're interested in broadening horizons, of course, but it can be more focused on the range of sectors, industries, the range of jobs within a sector or within an organization. And they'll be ready at this stage to hear more detail about what your job title means, about what your organization does. They'll also be really keen to understand how you got there. So the pathways are really key. And talking about how a pathway might not have been linear for you is also really valuable. So this can aid students in thinking about their subject choices. Again, on the slide, you'll see key stages and the age they correspond to. Nothing to worry about, but something to be aware of before you present. So in year 7, they're still transitioning from primary school, for instance, but when they get to GCSE level, they might be thinking about subject options. In the year before that, they might be thinking about A-level subjects. And then at 16 to 18, they might be thinking about their options after school. So should I go to university? Should I do an apprenticeship? Should I go straight to work? So it's possible that you'd be invited to sessions themed around pathways or subject areas, so computer science and the sectors that might relate to. Next slide, please. Again, thinking about your audience before you join an activity, this is what we want young people to get out of the session. Linking curriculum to careers in a more explicit way than in primary. So sectors that relate to the subject, pathways, and helping them make decisions. Sometimes they might be overwhelmed by choice, so talking about how you made choices. And again, gender stereotypes matters here too, and talking about how a sector might be diversifying their talent. Motivation just as important as with primary schools, and that can be very much linking back to what subjects they're choosing, as I said. But also understanding that a range of jobs might exist within an industry. So the HR example that we've been bringing up, you could talk about how HR, you work in a certain company or organization, but that could apply to many, many sectors or many, many organizations. Or, for example, if a young person is interested in law, but they don't want to qualify as a lawyer, the fact that there are many, many different jobs in the legal sector, for instance. Next slide, please. What they'll need from you, some of it does overlap with primary, but what's helpful is understanding where they are in their school journey. So again, looking at what year group, what key stage, where are they in choosing their options. Like with primary, be real with them, talking to them, not at them. And you can do more specific examples. They're ready for more detail, and they'll be really interested in how you got to where you are today and maybe how that changed from the aspirations you had at their age. You carry a lot of authority for these young people. In some ways, your voice matters more than their parents and their teachers, because they see you as real people from the real world of work. So you can own that and give them nuggets of advice and motivation. You may be simplifying your language for them, but that doesn't mean you need to patronize them. You can be as authentic as you would with any audience. To give us that on the ground perspective again, I'm going to pass over to Sally Ann from Eckington School in Derbyshire, who does loads of Inspiring the Future activities.
Thank you very much, Avanti. I've been nodding furiously to everything everybody's said. It's so fantastic to have the opportunity to be involved in this, and thank you to all the volunteers out there that give up their time to come into schools, because as Avanti said, you really do make such a huge difference to the students. So I wanted to talk to you about secondary school students. I've worked with Inspiring the Future for the last couple of years, and most recently been working with year 12 students, which is lower sixth form, and assigning a mentor to each of those students, somebody who is already working in the industry that they would ultimately like to go into, somebody doing their dream job, and a chance for the student to have a one-on-one conversation with the mentor. This year we've gone virtual with the meetings, and it's been an absolute phenomenal success. I think we've held 75 mentoring meetings. They've all been online, they've all been virtual, and the students have absolutely thoroughly enjoyed them. I've had feedback from the head of year 12 that the common room in sixth form is absolutely buzz with mentoring conversations and the things that they've picked up and learned from their mentors. So yeah, I just wanted to give you some tips that I've kind of picked up. I've had the pleasure of sitting in on all of these meetings in the last term, September to December. And I think one of the main things is that hearing all the discussion about primary talk as well is that's a very good basis for coming into a secondary school. All of those things that you would do for a primary school, think about when you're coming into a secondary school as well. The key thing I would find out about from the person that's invited you in is why. Why are they inviting you into school? What do they want from you? So it could be that they've invited you in because you are coming in to talk to a classroom of biologists, and you would fit into a certain part of the curriculum, and it's your knowledge in a biology field that fits in, and that's why they want you in. Or it could be because you are a very successful person in your field. It could be that they're focusing on women in STEM subjects, or people that have done apprenticeships and climbed the career ladder. So it's really important for you to know what it is we are looking for, where it fits within the students' learning. And some of the most successful talks we've had, the person we've given them lots of detail beforehand, and so they can talk to the students. Okay, I know you've already studied this and you've studied this and you haven't yet studied that, but what I'm here to talk to you today about is this, and it really gives them some perspective to their learning and how it fits in. And also what you're doing, without kind of explicitly saying, is that everything you're learning you can use out in the real world, in a job, in a career. So it really nicely gives that link kind of subliminally sometimes. So yeah, find out what we want from you, and then tailor your talk to that. You know, think about what you're going to say, and think about, have I really placed an emphasis on my apprenticeship route, or have I really talked about being a woman in this industry? So you can tailor it that way. Another tip is to really assume that the students know nothing about your job. So it kind of going back to the primary a little bit, you can come in and start right at the beginning, you know, talk about your job in very kind of basic terms, just so that you can hook the students in, because it might be that some students have heard of your job, heard of your company, but it might be that you're in a classroom where there are some students that haven't. Especially if you find out what year group you're coming to talk to, it may be that if you're talking to a group of year 7 students, they are fresh out of primary school, and if they weren't lucky enough to go to a primary school that had a careers program, this could be the first time they've met somebody externally, somebody from industry. So it's really good to kind of use those primary tips as well. So assume they know nothing, but also don't assume that they've freely elected to be sat in front of you. We, as the teachers, as the careers leaders in school, we know that we want them to have exposure to lots of different people, lots of different industries, lots of different jobs, so that they can make a decision about their future. And you may feel that, oh, not really, you know, do these children want to listen to this? But it's, you know, it's part of a program, it's part of a whole suite of careers activities. So I think if you kind of have that, yeah, okay, they might not feel like they want to know this, but I'm going to start with a really interesting anecdote or a really funny story, or a connection, like Victoria said, to, you know, have you come on a bus today? Do you know how that bus is put together? You know the wheels on the bus, and, you know, kind of relating to something in their world. Another tip I've put here is to build a rapport. So as you would do in any professional situation, you know, talk to the students. The mentoring meetings that we've run this year, they've been one-on-one, and the best ones are where, yeah, the mentor will do a lot of talking, but then they'll ask lots of open questions for the student to be able to respond. And, you know, sometimes just talking to somebody new is such an experience, such a new experience for the students, that that's kind of part and parcel as well. And I always say to the students at the end of the mentoring meeting, you've just talked to somebody for an hour that you've never met before. It's amazing. That in itself is phenomenal. So you know, don't be afraid with secondary school students, especially if you're in a small group or one-on-one. Ask them questions, you know, talk to them, find out a little bit about them, and it might be that it's a analogy that you can kind of keep referring back to and kind of really hook them in. So the next thing I've talked about is school policies. When we invite people into school, we always let them know, especially in classroom situations, is that we have a no hands up policy. So we've had visitors in the past come in and they'll say, right, put your hand up if you know this. And our students, we don't do that in school. We have a random name generator or names on a rudimentary lollipop sticks so that students are picked at random. And once you know that and you know the school's policies, then you will be able to adapt your content to that and make sure that you're following the same procedures that the students are really comfortable with and that they know inside out. And the bottom point on there is that our students, especially our sixth form students, when I gave out the list of mentors and I told them who I'd paired them with, they furiously got on their phones and was Googling and doing a bit of research themselves. So they will look you up, they will find out a bit about you, just as we'd expect them to if they were going for an interview. We'd expect them to do some research on a company. So, you know, ask them, have you Googled me? Do you know anything about me? Do you know anything about the company that I work for? It's all really, really good experience for the students. And I think something else, just one thing I'd like to add is don't be afraid to ask for feedback. Once you've come out to school, you've delivered your talk and you know you had a good session with the students, get in touch with us afterwards and ask us how it went and did it fit into the criteria, the curriculum that we were looking for. And that will help you tailor your content as well. But yeah, thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sally Ann. So now we'll hear from Nicola, who's done loads of delivery to both primary and secondary.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me okay. So my name is Nicola Oshonaike and I've been an Inspiring the Future volunteer for around 3 years now. I currently have 2 jobs. So I'm an IT audit manager working across the civil service. So I evaluate anything technology, so cybersecurity, GDPR, and moving into artificial intelligence now. I'm also a business owner, so I train people to learn how to use data analytics. So if you ever hear a politician or a scientist say, the data tells us ... that's the result of data analytics. But I've also been a mechanical engineer. So I worked for an aerospace company designing components for aeroplanes. And there's been quite a lot of demand from teachers for me to talk about that because the representation of females in engineering is still quite low. Can we change the slide, please? Thank you. So some of the tips I would like to briefly share. When communicating what my job is, I've used a similar approach for both primary and secondary school pupils, but just used more detail for the secondary. I always aim to bring my job to life and just to really try and get them excited. So an example, it's unlikely they've heard of a technology auditor. So I've said I'm an investigator, but instead of investigating crime, I investigate people in business using technology. Or instead of saying I work for the civil service, I might say my ultimate boss is the Prime Minister, because they probably would have heard of him. And similar with data analytics, they probably haven't heard of that either. But I might say it's the techniques that helps Amazon and Netflix know what to recommend that you buy and watch next. So they've recognized those kind of things. So when communicating what I do every day, here I think it's most important to just show passion for what you do, but just keep it really simple. So I've said things like, I really love this job because every day is completely different, or I have to interview different people and I get to travel when it isn't a pandemic, or I get to create content for my own business, for social media, that kind of thing. So I often mention what can be challenging about my job, but again, try to remain positive. So maybe it's hard to get people senior than me to listen because they don't like being told what to do, or I have to read lots of documents, but I've had really great treats like going to visit the McLaren racing team. Now, some kids are put off by subjects that they perceive to be hard or difficult. So I try to emphasize to them that I did study maths and physics, but I'm definitely not naturally smart. I just work really, really hard. I stayed focused and I had great teachers that supported me. And when I was young, I never saw a single Black female engineer, but I still wanted to be one and I made it. It's just those things to kind of motivate them. The most exciting part about sharing my story to the children is hopefully getting them excited about aiming high and achieving their goals. And I try to relate my job to things that they will instantly recognize. So I often say that, can you imagine if there were no engineers, there'd be no roller coasters, no video games or trampoline parks, and they're always horrified when they hear stuff like that. Or if you work in technology, you could be the next creator of the next best-selling video game. So it's just to kind of get them excited. Something that I noticed about secondary and sixth form pupils from their questions, that they seem really worried about failing exams and picking the right subjects. So I really try to emphasize that I did not get the grades that I expected, but I failed, but I recovered. So, and also that my original career is not the one that I have now. So, you know, changing your mind is acceptable. So I often explain to them that some of my teachers didn't think that I was smart enough to be an engineer, but despite what they said, I worked hard and I made it. And I did get lower grades than I should have done for my place at uni. I took a slightly different route and I still achieved a first-class degree. So, you know, it might not go to plan, but you can take a different route and still make it. And I think a really important point for them is that it's really important to push yourself and be brave and just try things that are different. You never know what's going to happen. So I think my main takeaways would be similar to what Victoria mentioned, just avoid jargon where you can. I think as adults, we don't even know it's jargon. So just kind of explaining what is project management, what is marketing in just simple terms. Again, bring your job to life. If you're excited about it, they will be excited too. The other tip would be about timing. I think it's really important to stick to your allocated time. So I often have a little stopwatch next to me just to make sure that I'm on time. And I often end with something memorable, so maybe a short quote. So I often say that you can be what you cannot see. But I've seen other people have a really cool rhyme or use a prop or anything you're comfortable with, really. Just to end, I think that presenting to kids is one of the best ways as an adult that you can fine tune your communication skills. But obviously with the virtual offer, you can't see their reactions, but you know, keep the energy high, keep it simple. And if you try to reference things that they're familiar with, video games, Netflix, trampoline parks, I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm personally grateful for the opportunity to be able to volunteer like this. It's really helped my confidence levels in presenting virtually, which has helped me at work and my business. And I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to help the young people, because in these hard times, they need all the help they can get. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That was amazing and very inspiring. We are really over, so I actually don't think we have any time for questions, unfortunately, but I do have a record who's asked what. So tomorrow I'll make sure that I answer those for you, and if they're for particular members of our panel, I'll try and get them to feed in their thoughts as well. Before we do end, I would love to do the poll. Launch that again and just see if that has shifted, so that we've got hopefully more feeling extremely confident or very confident versus somewhat confident. So just a few seconds for you to cast your votes now. That would be really, really helpful. And hopefully we've given you some tips and tricks for how you can adapt your content. Okay, so that looks like a nice shift. So nobody is feeling not so or not at all, which is perfect. We've got a lot more feeling extremely confident and a lot more feeling very confident, and still feeling 26% feeling somewhat confident. What would be really great is after this, there's 3 things as next steps. So we've done the poll, but also do go away and have a reflect on something that you've learned today and maybe how you might think about talking about your job differently. And if you have any questions about that, for those that are feeling still a bit somewhat confident, do feel that you can contact us. My contact details are on the next slide. And then the other thing is we do have a survey, a feedback survey. We do listen to all of the feedback that you give us, and we make sure we implement it in all of our training webinars. So if you do have 4 minutes, do fill that out, and I think that's being circulated in the chat. And I will also be sending around a email tomorrow which will have the recording of this session. It will have some slides because I see some of you have asked for that, and it will also have that survey as well. So just before I go, a huge big thank you to Sally Ann, Nicola and Liam, and to my colleagues Avanti and Sarah as well. Your insights have been invaluable, and I'm really grateful to have you here with us today. So thank you so much. And that's the end for us. Have a lovely afternoon, and speak to you all soon.